Hello and welcome to InFocus. I'm G. Sampath. Trade related tensions have been rising between India and Bangladesh. In a seemingly tit for tat move, India has restricted imports of certain goods from Bangladesh, especially ready made garments and certain processed food items and other related goods. And these imports have been restricted only to two seaports in Kolkata and Nhava Sheva. About 11 land ports have been blocked in the northeast. This move has caused concern and alarm among both importers and exporters in both these countries, as goods laden trucks have been stuck at the various land ports. Bilateral trade between India and Bangladesh last fiscal was about 10.56 billion US dollars. India imported goods worth 1.56 billion dollars while exporting goods worth 9 billion dollars to Bangladesh. Evidently, India enjoys a huge trade surplus with Bangladesh. So, why has India imposed these curbs? What will be their impact on traders and consumers? And what are the chances of this mini crisis, so to speak, being resolved quickly? Joining us today is my colleague and senior journalist Kallol Bhattacherjee, who covers India Bangladesh relations for The Hindu. Kallol, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much, Sampath.
So, Kallol, to start with, I was just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what prompted India to block land routes for trade and restricting Bangladeshi imports to the two seaports of Kolkata and Nhava Sheva. Why did we take this move?
Well, India's primary argument is that it is a corrective measure for bilateral trade. India believes or has been feeling for some time now that Bangladesh has been cherry picking the trade issues and trade targets on its to its advantage, and therefore the move is there therefore to convey number one to Bangladesh that the northeastern part of India is but by no means a captive market of Bangladesh, and also secondly that India, whenever it wishes to remind Bangladesh that it is actually Bangladesh which is in a landlocked condition, because Professor Yunus, in a now famous speech in China in the month of March, had said that the northeastern part of India is landlocked. But what's happening right now is that we are witnessing that all the land ports of India, more or less, barring, of course, the seaports, couple of seaports, um, are more or less closed to Bangladesh's major exports. And what's happening in addition is that the list of items that have been curbed at the moment, or rather being stopped from entering India from Bangladesh, these are going to be reviewed from time to time. So it also tells us that it's a highly fluid situation, which will vary from time to time or from season to season. And secondly, all the goods that will be coming to Nhava Sheva and through the port of Kolkata, they are going to be reviewed, and they'll be going through checks.
Right. So, when there is this impression which has been given by the Indian government that this is a tit for tat kind of a move, it's in response to something which was started by Bangladesh. So, what exactly did Bangladesh do if it did something to provoke this kind of a measure? Was it just a statement made by Professor Yunus in Beijing? Is it in response to that statement? Could that not have been sort of engaged with diplomatically, or was there also some other trade measure which Bangladesh took in response to which we have made these restrictions on land ports?
Well, Bangladesh has a number of trade-related grievances, like every country in the world, or perhaps in the neighborhood. It's not unnatural for countries to have trade issues with neighbors. Number one, because India's trade with Bangladesh is hugely to India's advantage, and Bangladesh is acutely, aware of it. They want some sort of corrective measures, especially when it comes to anti-dumping duties and jute-related issues, etc. And they suddenly came up with this 13th of April measure whereby they stopped the entry of Indian cotton yarn into Bangladesh, and they also stopped the import, or rather India's export of rice through the port of the Hilly port, the land port, and they stopped it.
Bangladesh completely stopped the import of Indian yarn completely
That's through their land ports.
through the land.
Through
But
their
through
land
the
ports.
sea, it was still
Yeah, I mean,
open.
yeah, through the so other land ports it was of course open. So therefore, it was felt as if this is a significant measure that Bangladesh took without consulting India. And cotton yarn from India is a major export from India to the neighborhood. So therefore, it was taken note of, and it was felt that Bangladesh took that decision unilaterally.
Right. And there are reports that this blocking of land routes for Bangladeshi imports, 11 of them, into the northeast, would sort of adversely impact the supply chain for businesses in the northeast. So, how serious a concern is this? Are we, in a sense, also shooting ourselves in the foot? Because if we are going to have our businesses and our importers' businesses getting affected, is that's the kind of a lose-lose for both the countries, isn't it?
Well, it's these sort of corrective measures which are actually affected overnight. They don't usually happen without some pain to the implementing side also. So it's quite obvious that the people who are partnering Bangladesh's commercial and ventures in the northeast, they are also suffering. But the idea is that they would be suffering in the short run, and sooner or later they would have to innovate and sort of partner with other parts of the country, because there are these necessary infrastructure related issues that will be resolved from the Indian side very soon, so that they can fly in things, or perhaps they could use the railways to take things to items to the northeast from other parts of India, because there are manufacturing sites in India that can actually fill up those requirements for the northeast. So that is the idea that the officials have here, that whatever is required for the northeast, those could be brought through the railways, or if necessary, those could be flown to the northeastern uh,
Brought through the railway through the chicken neck
chicken's
thing.
neck, yeah, if necessary. And then what happens is that this is an organic relation that had grown over the last 4 decades, especially since 1990. And the bilateral trade was in the range of 10 billion plus dollars, and it developed over a lot of hardship. And just so the Bangladeshi side has been reminding us that we could have done much better if it was left uninterrupted, and if there were misunderstandings, or if there were issues that were emerging because of certain actions from their side, it could have been resolved through dialogue. But I think India is the regional, a big power, and it wants to make a point that in future certain things should always be done in consultation with India. And big powers of course set the rules for the region, whether one likes it or not. And this is a very unique development in India Bangladesh's commercial relation. It has never happened in the past where India has actually stopped the land ports from accepting Bangladesh's exports. Now, what's going to happen even more, I want to tell you, and go back to the seaports, that even the seaports are not really open forever for Bangladesh's exports. Because Nhava Sheva and Kolkata, there will be mandated checks for all the items that come in. Because India has been quite upset for some time that Bangladesh has been carrying out what it describes as very aggressive checking of trucks or other vehicles from the Indian side that were carrying items into Bangladesh. So that's also a messaging from India that, if necessary, even the seaports could be, tightened for Bangladeshi exports.
And then there are also sort of statements from some different quarters in the government that there's been so much of goods coming in from Bangladesh into these two ports. It's leading to a lot of clogging and backlogs and all kinds of sort of
That is
log
a
jam.
that is from my point of view, it appears like a shortfall in infrastructure. If there is logjam and clogging and blocking, this sort of um, time-consuming processes, then these can be resolved through better infrastructure development on our side. I don't think that's a sufficient explanation for taking these sort of corrective measures, quote unquote corrective measures. But in reality, I think more investment and the more regional trade is always better. But this is a very specific moment in India-Bangladesh relation where the political factors are overshadowing the commercial and economic sense. So I would rather say that this is a far bigger political problem than just a commercial or economic problem.
Right. So speaking of the political dimension of it, and before we get into that, I wanted to ask you about one other measure which we seem to have taken recently, which is that we rescinded the transshipment facility which we had extended to Bangladesh. Now, what did we hope to achieve from that kind of a measure?
That's again a measure which happened in the backdrop of worsening political relation, and each of these measures are basically escalatory steps. And these are messages that are being conveyed to the Bangladeshi side. And if the previous measure was aimed at just conveying some sort of a commercial tightening from the Indian side, this time the message is actually directly aimed at Professor Yunus, that it was Professor Yunus who described Northeast as a landlocked area and described Bangladesh as the guardian of the ocean, and that is Bay of Bengal. And it was quite not really a sagacious move on the part of a Nobel laureate that he took up a third country while visiting China, and described a very important part of that country, that is India's northeast, as a region that the Chinese could exploit through Bangladesh, or the Chinese could access through Bangladesh. I think that was not a very wise move, even for that. For that moment or for that discussion that he was having in China. But having said that, these are very, very well crafted messages that have gone from the Indian side. That it is specifically to convey to Professor Yunus that what India is trying to convey is essentially a fallout of his remarks in China, and therefore it is him who is directly held responsible from the Indian side. These are not polite messages, but that is what it is. It is a very tough message from India directed towards the Bangladesh's leadership, the current interim government leadership.
So it is not just his description of the Northeast as a landlocked region with Bangladesh as a guardian of the ocean. It is not that India is taking umbrage at, but rather the fact that he sort of implied or rather explicitly stated that the Northeast, so-called landlocked part of India, could be a zone where Chinese investments or Chinese businesses could expand and sort of cater to that market. Is that what we are taking umbrage
True, and
to?
also apart from China, China's the other regional partner of China, that is Pakistan, has been warming up to the Yunus government in a big way in the last nine
Isn't it
months.
more the reverse? The Yunus government has been warming up to Pakistan.
Well, the Pakistani High Commissioner in Dhaka has been one of the most visible and one of the most active diplomats in Dhaka right now. He's recently he has gone on some unexplained reasons. He's gone on leave. So there are all sorts of gossip about why did he leave suddenly. But before he left, the High Commissioner of Pakistan in Dhaka was really active, and it is not he was not rather no Pakistani diplomat was seen to be so active in the last say 25 or 30 years in Bangladesh. And apart from just being, diplomatic activity, they also held the first foreign office consultation between the two sides. That was probably the first in 16 years that they held. Then there were also talks about growing trade. There were ships coming from Karachi, and the two sides also got into some sort of aviation agreement under which 3 to 4 airlines from Pakistan and from Bangladesh were to start aviation services. And these are developments that were being watched very closely from the Indian side, and also providing some sort of a political subtext for this massive closure that they have imposed. The Indian side has imposed on Bangladesh.
Sort of probing this economic dimension of this entire tension a little bit more, Kallol. I mean, if you look at the big picture, intra-regional trade in South Asia is just 5%, okay? And it is abysmal compared to other regional trade blocs like ASEAN or any other bloc. It's usually advantageous to a region when all the neighboring countries are able to sort of expand their trade relations because it works out to cheaper for the consumers, better profits for the traders. It works in every way rather than looking to someone who is like 10,000 miles away in another continent for your essential whatever requirements in terms of imports. So shouldn't we be looking to boost trade among our immediate neighbors, especially Bangladesh, with whom we already have a strong trade relationship, rather than sort of putting up new barriers to it to send a message and all that?
Yes, exactly. Because if you apply common sense, then overland trade for India is an enormously beneficial thing. Whether you look at Bangladesh or Myanmar or Nepal and even Bhutan, these are the countries that can provide, and then that have also provided in the past a great deal of trade advantage. And right now, Nepal and Bangladesh are among the top 10 trading partners of India. But over the last 10 months or so, Bangladesh has slipped down that ladder because of the visa problems are really enormous, and the Bangladeshi traders are unable to travel to India, and Indian travelers are unable to go to Bangladesh because of security concerns, etc. So Bangladesh is fast slipping down that ladder. But overland trade is traditionally of great advantage to India, and surprisingly, the government of India, that is the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the External Affairs Minister Mr. Jaishankar, they have been talking about connected borders and connectivity projects repeatedly. So it also goes against their declared positions and principles, and some of the projects in the region, like you look at all the cross-border railway projects, energy projects that India and Bangladesh have got into, the electricity transfer projects that India and Bangladesh have got into over the last 15 years or so. These are all at risk right now because of this closure of the land ports that India has imposed. Now, if the closure does not lift, is not if it is not kind of revised or reviewed in the next fortnight or so, then we are basically looking at worsening relation between the two countries, because there is growing public demand in Bangladesh that there should be some sort of response from the Bangladeshi side also. Obviously, Bangladesh can't really respond in a very robust manner, but then Bangladesh can try to take India to some international arbitration or some other platform and make a case out of it. But what you are saying once again, that we already are, because of the existence of Pakistan, our trade with the Western neighbors, be it Pakistan or Afghanistan, and obviously with Central Asia, because we continuously talk about the fact that Central Asia can be accessed through the port of Iran, that is the Shabahar port of Iran. But the fact is, if only relations with our neighbors were better, perhaps overland trade with our Asian partner countries would have been better. But India is in such a geopolitically sensitive area, where perhaps because of our own actions and our own concerns, and for political reasons with that are part of the reality here, we are unable to do overland trade in that way, and that is why you always find that the most important trading partners of India are across the ocean. That is the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Singapore. These are the two countries that come to our mind immediately, and they are basically across the ocean. So why is it that we don't have overland trade partners, benefiting, and also in a mutually beneficial partnership with us, is something that can't be explained, but for the political reasons. Perhaps these are all part of our little political games that are played in South Asia and Southeast Asia between all these various power groups and lobbies and these capitals. It's unfortunate that it has come to this, but we also remember what happened in 2015 when Nepal complained that there was a blockade on its port, and we remember how Nepal suffered. And at that time, even Sri Lanka had told us that even Sri Lanka fears that if India, as a more powerful country, imposes a naval blockade on Sri Lanka, so therefore, the idea of connectivity as a project that could be mutually beneficial is also contested or by this shadow of possible ban or possible embargo and curb that India can unilaterally impose, because India is basically the rule setter for the whole region, be it politics or trade, and also in the field of military.
Speaking of India being the rule setter for this region, and earlier also you mentioned that we are the big power in South Asia, and therefore it's our prerogative to set the terms of engagement with Bangladesh or whoever it is when there is some kind of a dispute or some kind of dissonance in relations and so on. Now, I mean, if you just take a step back, I mean, the entire sort of sequence of measures began with Professor Yunus's comment about landlocked northeast in China. Now, India was probably, sort of reacting to the fact of, Chinese involvement of whatever kind economically in this region as well. Now, we do have this position that, China tends towards a unipolar Asia, whereas, India would want a multipolar Asia. Now, we have spoken of multipolarity on multiple forums of foreign ministers also said so. Now, when it comes to South Asia, we don't seem to be interested in a multipolar South Asia. We want a unipolar South Asia with India as the dominant power. So, in this, is there a contradiction here? Because would we have a different kind of an approach towards engagement if you're looking at a multipolar South Asia rather than a unipolar South Asia, or is this something we don't want to talk about at all? How does this work?
Well, I would first of all explain the fact that I use the term "we," and by "we" I am referring to the Indian state, and not as people from the media and civil society and other observers and stakeholders. I think the Indian state is really the rule setter for South Asia. Now, if you look back from 1947 onwards, many developments in South Asia took place because India acquired independence. And after India became independent, Nepal had to go through the change. It shed that Rana Shahi that it was under for nearly 90 to 100 years. And then finally, we saw what happened in East Pakistan. So, and then there were all these human rights movements, and etc. that also radiated in some ways or the other from India. There was also the internal movements and struggles that took place in India. They also set the rules in terms of society, in terms of state-to-state relation. So let us not. I'm not going to go into this, this notion that India is a unipolar power in South Asia, because I
No, I
think
mean it in the context of geopolitical competition with
with China,
China in this region,
right?
because
Yes,
China wants to get in and we
yeah.
don't want it to come in
Yeah.
here.
So what I'm trying to say is that trade, especially in today's world, trade is essentially a projection of power, and we know that the Chinese do it. Chinese use trade, and it is it is to their advantage, and it's good for them if they can. The Chinese state can do it successfully, and the Chinese state has done in the past. There are some pros and cons that are being discussed, and we all know what these things are, like debt trap and etc. that we talk about. The fact of the matter is, if other countries also want, other states also want. After all, the reality of the world is shaped by this, state to state contest. It is not essentially society to society contest. At the level of society, so people are very friendly to each other. Wherever we go, we are welcomed. They are welcomed here. But we know, and you know, that states mean power projection, and power in today's world, in the world where actually terrorism is not high in the priority of the world, but tariff is. Tariff is because money making is very important in today's world, especially for some of the biggest powers, say the Russian Federation, the Chinese, the Americans, of course, under Donald Trump. They all want to make money. They all want to, they want low tariff for their trade and higher tariff for your trade. So that is something that is inevitable in today's world when we start talking about power projection of the state. So yes, I mean, India, because of that problematic nature of our current world order, is also a regional power which is trying to use trade in some ways to project its power. Now, away from the morality of that decision, I mean, we have to also look at it from the very cynical perspective of a practitioner of state power. Perhaps when bureaucrat plans, or when they sit down and discuss, they discuss it from the point of view of, say, that the strategic Chanakyan or Machiavellian tradition that they have to project power because they want the Indian state to flex its muscles and make the region feel that it is in the presence of a regional behemoth or a regional leviathan. Yes, I mean, we all want a rationality to prevail in the field of connectivity and trade and people-to-people relation, but then states do set the rules in a world where they have been dominant, at least for the last 70, 75 years.
Right. I mean, one last question, Kalol, before we wrap up. Now, as per the latest media reports, it seems that Bangladesh has already sent a letter to the Indian Commerce Ministry through the Foreign Ministry requesting a Commerce Secretary level meeting to discuss this, port restrictions and find a way out. So, when are they likely to talk? Can we expect a restoration of normal trade relations anytime soon, or will the economic tensions, as you've been saying, track the recent downward trajectory of political ties as well between the two countries?
Well, Bangladesh has complained that it wasn't informed beforehand. And it also acknowledges that it is a sovereign decision of India. If India wants to do something, that India can do it, and it has no option but to just stare at it and wait for a collective measure also taken by the Indian side. But as of now, they are also looking at the possibility that perhaps this will escalate further, involving other ports, seaports, other communication lines, other connectivity projects.
As of now, is Bangladesh able to use India's ports to sort of ship to other countries?
There is a ripple effect.
Okay.
They can ship to other countries. They can also airlift to other countries, but their products and their items will be subjected to heightened investigation, heightened checks from our side. So therefore,
So their exports to Nepal, Bhutan, etc., are not affected as
it
of
is
now.
it is not affected on paper. But then, when India does something, then other powers in the region also take note, and they would also not show great deal of enthusiasm to do business with Bangladesh because investment could go wrong tomorrow if India takes some more actions. So therefore, the communication that has come from their side, I'm yet to be aware of whether this is going to go on. just like that, or would there be an answer to this communication from the Indian side? As of now, I haven't heard anything from the Indian side that they have sent an answer to the Bangladesh government about why this decision was taken, because whatever has been said has been already communicated off the record. So any government level on record communication hasn't happened so far. But I'm sure that this is a time which is really fraught with many risks, because this can create difficulties not just for the business community and for communities on the border areas and the people who are the consumers of items from the Bangladesh side. Because Bangladesh, let us remember, was not really exporting a great deal of products or unprecedented amounts of products
But this
to.
is going to hit their main export, ready-made garments, which is, I think, the largest
Yes, of
export
course. I'm
for them.
talking about, first of all, the northeastern part of India. The northeastern part of India was not really a huge market for Bangladesh. Yes, it was a good market, it's a steady return for them. But then the ban on the garment, the ready-made garment, the apparel sector is really a crippling blow for them. But overall, this is also sending a message that, in fact, we have read in the Hindu today about this the long-term impact that this could have at the level of people-to-people relation, because traders are also communicators, and they spread good feeling among societies. And if this continues for some time, then perhaps there'll be less goodwill for India, and that will not be to our strategic interest in the long run, because we do remember what happened to India's Northeast in the 1980s and 1970s and early 1990s, when those insurgent groups were based in Bangladesh. They have their own strategic importance in the region as well, and we have to remember that when the Indian government goes ahead and frames its commercial or regional policies, I'm sure they would also keep that in mind in the near future.
Right. This is a developing story clearly, and we'll know, I think, in the coming weeks how this sort of plays out. That's all I have for you in this episode. Kalul, thank you so much for
Thank you so
joining
much,
us.
Sampath.
Pleasure
Thank you.
talking to you.